So now, without further ado, tonight I am excited to welcome Leonard Pitts Jr., celebrating the release of 54 Miles. Leonard Pitts Jr. is the author of the novels The Last Thing You Surrender, Grant Park, Freeman, and Before I Forget, as well as two works of nonfiction. He was a journalist for more than 40 years, including a long tenure at the nationally syndicated columnist for the Miami Herald. He is the winner of the 2004 Pulitzer Prize for commentary, including and in addition to many other awards. So please join me in welcoming Leonard Pitts Jr. to Politics and Prose.
Good evening, everybody. I see some friends out there. Well, more than a friend, my wife there, and and next to her, an old friend of ours. How's everybody doing this evening? I am so pleased to be in a room full of people who still read books. I was beginning to feel like I was the only one. I want to spend a few moments talking about my new novel, 54 Miles. I want to tell you the story first, and then we'll talk about what it's about, because those two things are often two very different things. I'll read you an excerpt, and then I hope somewhere in there I will have raised some questions so that you guys will want to have a dialogue, and we'll see what ensues from there. Does that work for everybody? Okay, 54 Miles, right here, as you can see, takes place in the time, in the era of the voting rights march. The second chapter actually deals with the brutality on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that was faced by voting rights marchers on the 7th of March, 1965. It's a story that involves four main characters, and I'll run through them very briefly for you. One is Adam, who is 21, and he has left school without his parents knowing, left school in New York City to go down to work with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to be part of the voting rights campaign. And while he's on the bridge, he is brutalized. He's one of the people who's nearly killed by rioting Alabama state troopers. But that's far from the worst thing that happens to him. While he is recuperating, he discovers a secret about his family, about his life that sort of reshapes everything, not only that he knew about his family, but that he knew about himself. It turns out that he is not who and what he has always thought he was. And that sends him spiraling into this search for answers that pretty near gets him killed. Second character is his dad, George Simon. George is a white guy, a Marine, a former Marine in the Second World War, and a preacher in Harlem who loves his son, loves his wife, but his wife is a little bit. Not that she doesn't love him, but there's a little bit of prickliness there, not toward him, but just sort of, she's hard to get close to. She's dealing with traumas from her life, from things that she experienced back during the war era. So there's always, there's love, but there's this tension. There's this little bit of distance, which Adam has felt as well. Finally, there is Johann. Johann, for those of you who read my last novel, The Last Thing You Surrender, will remember that Johann was originally calling himself John Simon, and he was an immigrant from Hungary, and he had come to America to make his fortune, and he believed in the American dream, and he wanted to become white, as America defines whiteness. And he went through some things that really sort of reoriented his understanding of what white was, and whether or not this was something he was really willing and wanting to sacrifice himself in order to be. When we re-meet Johann in this book, he is 82 years old, and he is suffering from dementia. And so he's basically alone in the world at this, back in 1965, they would have called it an old folks home. He's basically cut off from the world with the exception of our final character, who is Luther. Luther is Thelma's brother, her big brother, and he is Adam's uncle and brother-in-law, obviously, to George. When Luther was 9 and Thelma was 3, they saw their parents murdered at the front door. That's just part of the trauma that Thelma deals with. And it wasn't just murder. It wasn't just being shot. It was what they used to call the spectacle killings, which haunted this country in the first years of the 20th century and the last years of the 19th century, where you have a crowd of people gathered around, good white Christian folk, uh, basically murdering one or two people, and not just murdering them, but killing them in the most cruelly creative way that you can. So when he was 9, Luther opened his door and saw his mother and his father being burned to death, being burned alive, and this has scarred him. It scarred him throughout his life. He's 20 years sober now when we meet him in this book, but he had a drinking problem. He has a certain bitterness about him, a certain edge to him, and he can't stand white folks. He has this real boiling rage toward white folk, and yet paradoxically, as I said, he is Johann's friend. He and Johann are good friends. When Johann has nobody else to come see him in this nursing home, Luther's the guy that goes to see him. Luther's a barber by trade, and he gives Johann a haircut once every 2 weeks, and visits him in between haircuts. So it's sort of this paradox between, you know, white people writ large, and the things that have happened to me in my life, and the reason that I have all of this rage, and this man who has been my friend, and his son who is married to my sister. So these are the things that drive Luther and the rest of the characters. Now, as to what the novel is about, it's about family trauma in the shadow of the 1965 voting rights campaign. But to me, even more, it's a novel about this whole idea of Black folk forgiving. And I've really kind of struggled with this. If you notice, whenever there's a shooting or some sort of trauma that befalls some African American, some unarmed person is shot or murdered in the street or whatever, it has become almost a cliche that the family will at some point say, we forgive this person. And I don't criticize that at all. Don't get me wrong. I think that speaks volumes about the heart and soul of Black folk, about the Christianity, or writ large, the faith of Black folk. So I don't criticize that at all. And yet, part of my issue, I guess my issue is that forgiveness is one thing, but we seem to think that forgiveness precludes accountability. Black folk have been forgiving white folk in this country since right after the Civil War. Those of you who know the history will know that when Lincoln and his cabinet met to talk about whether or not they should free the slaves, there was a lot of angst among the cabinet members about, well, we know how we've treated these folks. What are they going to do if they're free? We got to be very careful. We got to think long and hard about this. And yet when they were free, all they ever asked, and all they've asked in the 160 some years since then, is give us a fair chance and leave us alone. That's all that's ever been asked. And yet, over these generations, over these decades, we've seen so many atrocities committed against African Americans, and we keep seeing folks come and forgive, and have to forgive. And again, I don't criticize that. I'm not upset with that. But I also think that this act of reflexive forgiveness people get used to it. People come to expect it. This is what African Americans are going to do. And I think that it becomes incumbent, it becomes necessary to remind folk that African Americans, we're forgiving and all this, but also only human. Black folk are only human, like we are all only human. So, part of this novel was, one of the big points of this novel was to deal with this whole idea of forgiveness as Luther faces, as Luther deals with the tragedy that has sort of misshaped his life, the murder of his parents, this whole idea of forgiveness versus accountability. That's what the book is about. First I'm going to take an awkward sip of water. Then I am going to read for you about four or five pages of the third chapter. There's a prologue, first chapter. This is the second chapter. I'm going to read to you 4 or 5 pages from that. This is Luther going to the old folks' home, to the rest home, whatever you want to call it, to give Johann a haircut. And while he's there, he makes a discovery that sort of rocks him to his core and sets a lot of things in motion. Johann still had good days, but they were becoming fewer and further between. A doctor had warned Luther once, out of Johann's earshot that Johann would only get worse. He'll have peaks and valleys, he had said, but the condition itself is terminal. He won't recover from this. Even worse, the doctor said, he would likely linger for years, the fog encasing his thoughts getting thicker by the day, and until he withdrew from life completely, alive only in the technical sense of drawing air. Luther could not imagine a more terrifying fate. Johann would slowly be entombed within his own body. "You know what you are doing with my hair?" asked Johann. "You know I do," said Luther. He had been the old man's barber for almost 20 years now. "Don't leave it too long. I don't want to look like one of those rock and roll singers. Have you heard any of them with all the yeah, yeah, yeah? I feel sorry for the young people today who will never know what true music sounded like." "Erskine Hawkins," said Luther, naming the Alabama trumpeter who'd had big hits in the late 30s and all through the war. The old man cut him a look. "I was speaking of the classics," he said. "Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Johannes Brahms, and of course Ludwig van Beethoven. You get back to me when your Erskine Hawkins composes something as transcendent as Ode to Joy." Luther grinned. "I don't know about transcendent," he said, "but that one song of his, Tippin' In, that used to get everybody out on the dance floor." "Ach, you are a Philistine," said Johann. "And you a snob," said Luther. "Don't leave it too long in the back. I don't want to look like one of those Beatles. Have you heard them?" "I heard them," said Luther. "Nothing but a bunch of yeah, yeah, yeah." "Benjamin, are you sure you know what you're doing?" Luther paused in his clipping. Benjamin Johnston was the Negro man who, with his wife Alice, had been Johann's live-in cook and butler for many years. Benjamin had died in 1958, Alice in 1960. It wasn't the first time Johann had made the mistake. He'd done it twice before. But each of those times when Luther corrected him, telling him that his longtime butler was dead, Johann, a stoic man whose emotions were ordinarily more impregnable than Scrooge's wallet, had broken down, sobbing and wailing as if it had just happened. And for him, Luther supposed, it had. Now he considered briefly whether it was worth putting Johann through that ordeal again, and decided it was not. "Yes, sir," he answered, "I know." "Don't leave it too long in back," said Johann. "Lucille will think she's married one of those Beatles." "No, sir," said Luther, "we wouldn't want that." He kept clipping. After a moment, Johann said, "I saw him, you know." Who's that you saw?" "Bitters. I saw Floyd Bitters here." Again, the scissors in Luther's hand paused in their cutting. Floyd Bitters was the leader of the mob that killed Luther's parents. He and Johann had had some sort of confrontation while Luther was over in Europe. Johann would never say exactly what happened between them, but Luther knew that it had left him shaken and afraid. Now Luther prayed to a God in whom he did not believe. "Lord, don't ever let me get senile." And his hands went back to cutting. After a moment had passed, Johann said, "You're not Benjamin." It was almost an accusation. "No, I'm not." "Benjamin is dead." Yeah, he is." "My mind," said Johann. "I hate what is happening to my mind." His voice broke, and he wept quietly. Luther pretended not to hear. After a moment, Johann said, "Don't leave it too long." "No, sir," said Luther. "Don't want to look like one of those Beatles." "Ah, have you heard them?" "Lot of yeah, yeah, yeah," said Luther. "I pity the children today. They don't know what real music is." "Beethoven," said Luther. "Ode to Joy." "You know Ode to Joy?" "Yeah," said Luther. "Sing it all the time at the barber shop." "You have a barber shop," said Johann, a statement. "I do," said Luther. "It's on Davis Avenue." "Sure is," said Luther, "right there on the avenue." The old man smiled, pleased with himself for remembering. He said, "I saw Bitters." "Really? How's he doing?" Luther was whisking the hair from Johann's neck. "He's a terrible man. He beat me up, you know." Luther stopped. This was new. "Really? What happened?" Sudden tears were leaking down the old man's face. "I went into the town where Luther's parents were killed. This man Bitters, he heard my accent. It comes out sometimes when I get agitated. He called me bohunk. He said, 'You are no white man. You just look like one.' And he slapped me into the dirt and stomped me, broke my ribs. I was in so much pain, and I could do nothing. I was too weak. Ever since then, I've been afraid of him. You ain't got to be afraid, said Luther, his voice soft. He had been 9 years old when his parents were murdered. He knew what it was to fear Floyd Bitters. That was more than 20 years ago when all that happened. Johan's face brightened. Really? What year is this? Luther whipped the cape off of him, flakes of hair falling to the linoleum. It's 1965, he said, brand new day. He went to a closet, retrieved a broom and dustpan he kept there, and began sweeping up. Johann pointed at the television. The news was once again running the video of state troopers charging into a line of Negro protesters, bodies tumbling to the pavement, clubs flashing down, white clouds of gas drifting across the highway like ghosts. A terrible thing, he said. I don't understand how they can treat people like that. People who just want their freedom. I don't understand it neither, said Luther. President Kennedy should do something about this. You're right, said Luther, emptying the dustbin into a trash can. President Kennedy need to get off his ass. He replaced the dustbin in the closet, repacked his barber's tools, and took a seat on the bed. As difficult as it was being there, Luther always made himself stay at least an hour. It felt like a duty, some hard but honorable thing he was obligated to do, especially considering that no one else would be coming to see the old man until Luther returned midway through the week. George at least tried. He had been down to see his father 4 times since Johann had been placed there, but Luther knew it was difficult on a preacher's salary. Plus, there was the matter of getting the time off. The logical thing, as George had confided wearily on his last trip, would have been simply to return to Mobile. He could tell his sister to take their house off the market, and he, Thelma, and Adam could move in. But of course, the neighbors would complain at having Thelma and Adam there, and the state might intervene since it would not recognize them as married, and the law prevented people of different races from spending a night under the same roof. Even if those problems could have been resolved, though, there was also the fact that Thelma would never agree. She had not stepped foot in Alabama, even once in the 20 years since she left it. Thelma hated her home state with an incandescent passion, saw the whole thing off and set it adrift in the Gulf of Mexico, and she would not give a damn. Still, thought Luther, this was her father's husband, and that ought to count for something. He hoped George would get a chance to come down again soon. The old man's memory was going fast. How long before there would be nothing left? How long before his oldest son would walk through the door and his father would look up and not know who he was? Luther did not envy George that moment. They sat together for a few minutes. Johann mentioned the Beatles twice more. But what riveted his attention was the footage from the bridge, which kept repeating. Apparently, this carnage had happened today. Terrible thing, said Johann, shaking his head. Terrible. Yeah, you got that right, said Luther. He glanced at his watch. Well, he said, time for me to go. So soon? The old man looked crestfallen. He always did. I'll be back before you know it, said Luther. Johann's voice turned sharp. What is this place? Why am I here? This where you live now. I live here? Why? Luther was at the door. Because you need help, said Luther, and they the ones can give it to you. And then I'll go home? This is your home now, said Luther. This is my home? I'm afraid so, said Luther. He pulled open the door. But I'll see you soon, he said. He stepped into the hallway without waiting for a reply. He felt almost as if he was making an escape. In a sense, he supposed that he was. Luther stood in the hallway for a long moment, thinking. The day room was to his right. From the television, he could faintly hear Ralph Cramden threatening to send his wife to the moon. He rubbed his chin. Then he turned left. The first door he opened, he found 2 old men playing checkers. They looked up in confusion. Sorry, he said, closing the door. Wrong room. In the next room, a man was lying in bed, his hand moving vigorously beneath the sheets. At Luther's entry, the hand abruptly stopped what it was doing, and the man looked up sheepishly. Sorry, said Luther, closing the door. Wrong room. This was crazy, he knew. He could get in trouble. But something drove him on. In the 3rd room, a man was sleeping in a chair. The 4th room was empty. In the 5th room, an old man and a woman were watching television. Sorry, said Luther, I got the wrong room. The 6th room was dark. The figure on the bed was only a shape, a mountain range of shoulder and legs. The last of the day's late winter sunlight filtered in, and Luther saw with a start that the man was turned toward the door and that he was looking at Luther, pale eyes alert and curious in the drooping, colorless face of someone who has suffered a stroke. His right hand jittered aimlessly. He made an inarticulate sound that might have been a greeting, and Luther's heart stumbled. The man in the bed had been big once, had been powerfully built, but age and infirmity had carved the power out of him, left the skin sagging limply on his bones. Now he was just the leavings of the man he once had been. A thin thread of drool connected his flaccid lips to his bed shirt. He pulled those lips into a smile then, still watching Luther, hands still moving without purpose. It was meant, Luther supposed, as some sort of acknowledgement, a way of saying, hello, I see you there, or maybe, what a fine mess this is, huh? Something harmless and friendly like that. But Luther backed up a step. The man didn't recognize him, Luther knew. The man didn't recognize him. Luther knew him, though. Indeed, Luther would never forget him. All at once he felt hot, he felt dizzy, he couldn't breathe. Johann's voice. I saw him, you know? At first, Luther had dismissed it as just more evidence of the old man's crumbling memory, his fading hold on reality. But this was no hallucination or fantasy. Luther was in a room with Floyd Bitters. He was in a room with the man who murdered his parents. So that's a little bit from the third chapter of 54 Miles. And as I said, part of the crux of the book is what does Luther do? Floyd Bitters has escaped justice. The lynching happened in August of 1923, so this is 42 years that Floyd Bitters has lived life and escaped justice, escaped accountability, and basically gone on. And now, all of a sudden, Luther, who was 9 at the time, is 51 now, sees him. You know, what does he do? What's right? What does justice look like? What's the moral thing? So that's one of the tenets of the book. I'm not sure where we are for time because this clock has hit 7:21 for the last. Only 7:23. Okay, we're good. That's one of the main tenets of the book. This whole idea of forgiveness versus justice versus accountability. I'd like to. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask, or because I can go on talking. That's a warning. maybe even a threat.
Why did you write the book?
I wrote the book, and thank you for saving me. I wrote the book because the last novel, The Last Thing You Surrender, there was a plot thread that I could not tie up. It was Floyd Bitters. I could not find a way to resolve that, to bring justice to Floyd Bitters in the context of that last book. Are we okay? Oh, I'm sorry. Questions? Yeah, I'm sorry. Questions or the microphone right here if you have for further questions. But this question was, why did I write the book? And again, the answer was that I couldn't figure out a way in the previous book to resolve the Floyd Bitters question. I resolved a lot of stuff in that book, but Floyd Bitters went free. And there was never any accountability. There was never any real question of accountability, and that kind of bothered me. That novel took place in the 4 years of the Second World War, and I couldn't find a way to bring Floyd Bitters any justice. I couldn't find a way to bring myself, much less Luther, any closure. And that includes the fact that Bitters, in the book, Bitters goes to trial, but it's Alabama and it's 19, whatever. So going to trial, even when there's photographic evidence of your crime, doesn't mean a whole lot. It means you're still going to be set free. So I needed to have a way to reckon with the crimes of Floyd Bitters, and that was the main impetus for writing this. Then, as I said, I realized that there was also this secret between Adam and his mother that's just sort of lying buried. That is, what would happen if that detonated? This thing that he doesn't know about himself, and I have to be kind of cagey about this because I don't want to ruin the book for anybody that's going to read it, but this thing that he does not know, what happens if that detonates? What happens to their family? What happens to Thelma, who has tended this secret all of her son's life? What does that do to their family? Can they even still be a family? Because the secret is kind of grim and kind of dark. Other questions? We got a microphone up here.
I have a question.
Thank you, Maria. Why don't you hit the... Maria Majors, the #1 Lakers fan in Washington, D.C.
I want to know, in the beginning you said there were four main characters.
Right. Johann
Right, you didn't
George.
name Thelma.
That, yeah, I did.
Did
Johann
you?
George, Thelma.
No,
I didn't name Thelma?
you had
Bad me.
Adam.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you had four men. And I said, wait a minute, where's
Yes,
Thelma
no,
in all
Thelma.
of this?
Okay, then there are five main characters. Thelma's one of the main drivers of the
Yeah.
book. For Thelma, Thelma's arc is about dealing with her hatred of Alabama. Again, Alabama has scarred her. And the eruption of this secret, thank you,
You're welcome.
and the eruption of this secret forces her to go back to Alabama and to face just a humiliating ordeal that she has to go through that you would never wish on anybody, particularly a woman who's already suffered all that she has suffered. She has to go through this humiliating ordeal to save a son that she's never really been that close to. And so, that's Thelma's arc. Her arc almost breaks her. Would you agree with that, Miss Majors? Oh God, yes. Thelma's arc almost breaks her. So, her story is about going back to Alabama to rescue her son when she doesn't want to be there, and when she and her son don't have the closest and best relationship. Yes. Hi.
Hi. You're mentioning her son, but my first question is, how did you come about naming your book 54 Miles?
54 miles is the distance from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama, along Highway 80. Yeah, that's why the cover depicts the Edmund Pettus Bridge where the brutality happened. But they spent 3 weeks. The beatings happened on the 7th, and they finally were able to march on the 21st, and they marched into Montgomery on the 25th. So they basically spent the better part of 3 weeks trying to go that 54 miles.
Wow.
And I just found that symbolically powerful. I've driven that route a number of times. You drive it in about an hour, but it's just really fascinating to drive it and to stop and look at the places, because they have it marked now. Stop and look at the places where they camped overnight. On the Viola Liuzzo story, right?
Yes.
Yeah, on the rise where Viola Liuzzo was killed. There's a marker. It's pretty hard to find, but my wife and I finally searched it out when we were there last year. But 54 miles is the distance down Highway 80 between Selma and Montgomery, Alabama.
Okay, and then my second one is, you started talking about Thelma's son, and I read
Adam.
your prior book, The Last Thing You Surrender. Do you go into her relationship with her son, because her son was produced by the rape?
Don't.
Oh,
That was the part I was trying not to say.
but you elaborate more in this book.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I
Sorry.
Trust me, that's not the worst secret that's ever been given away in a book signing. There was one lady that gave away a secret on a book, and why did you kill so and so? And I'm like, we're going to need a police escort to get you out of here. I remember that. But no, it does go into her relationship with her son. That's why I said that the relationship is difficult because of what you said. How do you love this child? And the child, even if you're correct, toward the child, you're not mistreating the child, and you're correct in all your dealings, but you're not warm. And you're not motherly, and the child's going to pick that up. The child's going to feel that. So that, the part of the story is about, a big part of the story is about them sort of circling each other and finally coming to some terms, coming to grips. Anybody else? Hey there, sir.
Hi, good evening.
Good
When
evening.
I first saw the title, 54 Miles, my mind immediately went to all the politics of the time. I mean, there was a lot going on, and a lot of outsiders were there, and I'm wondering, does that surface in the book? Is that all of the civil rights leaders and all? Do they come across at any point, or
Yeah,
all of
I
this?
mean, the civil rights leaders, the movement, they're definitely in the background because it's a family story with them as the backdrop. But yeah, one of the things that some of the characters do bring out is this sort of hostility between SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Martin Luther King and SCLC. You know, people forget all of the tension and the drama that was going on among those groups at that time. But some of my characters are very, as were many members of SNCC, are very resentful of Dr. King for sort of swooping in on top of their movement. You know, King specialized in what we now call street theater. You know, he basically created these morality plays on, you know, that the TV cameras ate up and that moved hearts and minds, which was very powerful. That wasn't what SNCC was doing. SNCC was quietly organizing. So there was that tension. Plus, SNCC was younger. I mean, John Lewis and the rest of these guys, they're probably, what, early 20s by this time? And King is 1965, he's 35, if I'm not mistaken. My math is not my strong suit. I know he died at 39 in 1968, so he's like mid 30s. He's an older man, you know. And so a lot of the people in SNCC were not real thrilled with him, and that does surface in the book, particularly with Adam and some of his friends. There's a part in the chapter that deals with the tragedy on the Pettus Bridge, where one of Adam's friends who refuses to march said, these Negroes about to make you have to swim in the Alabama River, you know, because they weren't cottoning to the idea of, you know, we're going to march across this bridge into the face of the Alabama State Police and the Alabama and the troopers and whatever. They weren't really with that idea.
Good. All right.
Thank you. Hi there.
Hi, I have one more question.
Go for it.
You wrote, you know, my friends, there comes a time when people get tired. Why?
That's the epigram of the book. She asked, why did I lead the book with Dr. King's statement, you know, my friends, there comes a time when people get tired. That's from the speech that he gave announcing the Montgomery bus boycott. And I'll answer your question in a second, but first let me set the scene on that. If anybody has ever heard that speech, it's sort of meandering because it's not something he's written down. He's sort of off the top of his head, and it's sort of meandering, and people are applauding, and you know, but there's no real juice to it. And then he says, "You know, my friends, there comes a time when people get tired," and he can't finish the sentence. The rest of the sentence is something about being flung across the abyss of, you know, something, you know, but none of that registers. People are on their feet. It sort of detonates that crowd. You know, there comes a time when people get tired, and they're like, "Yes, finally somebody has said it." And you know, I wanted to take that for this book because that's kind of what I'm dealing with here. This fact that, you know, and we talked about it earlier, this whole idea of African Americans as long-suffering, patient, and always forgiving, you know, but African Americans are only human, and there comes a time when people get tired. And so that's why I chose that. And I was thinking specifically, and you'll see the connection when you read the book. I was thinking specifically of Luther, you know, because Luther's been carrying a weight all his life. Again, he's 51 years old. He saw his parents murdered when he was 9. He's been carrying a weight in his heart all of his life. And so, you know, he's a man who is fundamentally tired. And so a lot of the book is him working that out and figuring out what that means and what he's going to do. Anybody else? I like that you picked that up. That's very good. Hey there.
Good evening.
Evening.
You mentioned accountability as an idea that you wanted to explore in this novel. Is there a vision of how that looks like in the novel? And how does that look like for you in 2024? What would accountability need to look like?
Well, it is dealt with in the novel, and I don't want to give you too much because, again, I'm trying to maintain some of the secrets. Maria, who has read the book, is down there going, don't tell him. I'm not going to say anything, Maria. But yeah, that's dealt with in the novel. For me, it would look like not having to pray and light candles and jump up and down and thank God every time someone like the people who killed Amadou Diallo get the justice that they obviously deserved. Okay. I mean, even when justice is served, a la the case of George Floyd, even when justice is served, it seems like it's so exhausting. You can't just expect that, okay, a crime was done, an obvious crime was done, and justice is going to do what justice is supposed to do. No, you got to march, and you got to pray, and you got to be on tenterhooks, and like, oh Lord, is justice going to be served? So accountability would look like just the justice system, to the degree that we agree we have a justice system, which is a whole nother argument with me, but the justice system doing what the justice system theoretically is supposed to do, which is holding folk accountable. You do the crime, you do the time. You kill somebody, who is enjoying the comfort of their own house, as happened with Tatiana, and I'm blanking on her last name, in Texas. Then there's not excuses. There's not people having to wonder if justice is going to be done. There's justice. That's what it would look like to me if we were able to just simply expect that justice would be done. It's the sad truth of our sojourn in America that you cannot expect that justice is going to be done. You can hope for it, you can pray for it, but you can't expect it. You can't take it for granted that justice is going to be done. And that's what accountability would look like for me. Just do what, King on the last night of his life said, all we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If the justice system would just be what it claims that it is, I'd be happy. Yes, hi.
Hi. The Irish are wrestling with truth and reconciliation commissions now as to solving some of the problems of the Troubles. And there's been a court case just recently where a British judge found that the person who admitted to a British soldier who admitted to crimes really didn't have to admit to much of anything. What do you think of truth and reconciliation commissions as a
I
solution
think
to
that a
things
Truth
like
and
this?
Reconciliation Commission would be a wonderful thing for this country, but I don't think it's a panacea. The problem is this country has been in flight from the truth for almost 250 years. So the idea of having a commission for that, I think it's good for this reason in particular. And I don't know that it's going to change a whole lot of minds, but I think it's good for this reason in particular. It would be good for people who have been mistreated and oppressed to finally be able to get their voices on the record and to be heard. Okay? When you are mistreated systemically, historically for years, and then people tell you you've not been mistreated, one of the things that you want, even if you crave this subconsciously, is I just want to be heard. I want somebody to, I want this to be on the record what happened to me, even if, nothing comes of it. I want this to be on the record what happened to me. So I think it'd be powerful in that regard, but I don't know that there's the political will in this country to, if there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to follow its dictates. And they had one in South Africa, and it wasn't a panacea either. And I wasn't aware of the one in Ireland, but I'll be looking for that now.
Well, as I say, the family was dissatisfied with the British soldier's testimony, and they went to court, and he says, well, I admitted this and I admitted that, and the judge said, yeah, but nothing happened.
Right.
So he's continuing. He's allowing the family of the deceased to
So
continue
it's a sort of
their
thing
actions.
of where if you tell the truth, in order to get you to tell, we bribe you with nothing will happen. Is that what you're saying?
Well, in this particular case, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what it was in South Africa as well, which is kind of difficult because basically all that you're getting out of it is that whole thing of having the truth on the record, which is not unimportant, but I keep coming back to this. Accountability also matters. My life matters. Your life matters. And if somebody does something that damages or takes your life, then there should be some restitution for that, some consequence for that. Sorry. There should be some reckoning.
Right.
There should be some reckoning. A person should not be able to just take your life randomly, without some kind of reckoning. Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that Ireland is doing that. I'll be real curious to see what happens out of it.
Well, as I say, if the person doesn't admit to anything, then
Yeah.
well, as long as nobody else has a question, I'll ask one.
Okay.
Another one.
Sure.
the archive several years ago had programs on soft integration, and Dean Smith, the coach at North Carolina, actually spoke at a program because he was, even though he was a coach at North Carolina, he was pretty much on the left side of things in his politics. And you can correct me on my dates here. Bear Bryant took Alabama out to Southern California in the late 60s, and Sam Cunningham scored 5 touchdowns against Alabama. And Bear Bryant came back to Alabama and said, the way we do things around here isn't going to work anymore. Are you familiar with that event?
I'm as far from a football fan as it is possible to humanly get. So I do know the name Bear Bryant, but that's about all I can tell you.
And apparently it just resulted in some more recruiting of black athletes by Alabama.
Okay. Oh.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions? Okay. Oh, here she comes.
Hello again.
Hello again.
I haven't read 54 Miles, but would you be willing to sign your other books?
Sure. I'll be happy to sign. How'd you like my other book? If you can answer that without giving away who killed who.
I know. My best book was The Last Thing You Surrender.
Okay.
I have never been so emotionally moved by this book. The way you just describe, it was like I could see. It was so visible, the book. And if anybody is curious.
Thank you. You're my new best friend. Thank you.
It was just so moving. It brought me to tears. I was very emotional. I had to even put it down at times because I was angry. But thank you.
Yeah, I hear that from people a lot on that particular book. That if you look at a lot of the reviews, particularly on Goodreads, they say very hard to read at times, but worth it. That's what pretty much 80% of the reviews say, which I take as a great compliment because I meant that book to be. I knew it was going to be hard to read.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be difficult. I knew it was going to tax people emotionally. But
it really did.
We're dealing with the stuff we're dealing with is not.
No, and it's like it's
light.
coming back around again. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Freeman.
Yeah, Freeman came out in 2012. The Last Thing You Surrender in 2019. She's selling some books for me. I like her.
And are you thinking about writing another book?
Not just thinking about writing. I finished the next book.
Oh.
Which I'll tell you that story briefly unless somebody has a question. It deals also with this theme of accountability, which seems to be stuck in my head right now. But it's basically about there's so many things it's about. It's about a Southern governor, and if I describe him and you think Ron DeSantis or somebody, that's on you. I didn't say it. But it's about this Southern governor who is running for president, and this governor has in his state he's outlawed African American history. He's one of these guys. He's outlawed African American history with what's called the Free Act, forbidding racist educational experiences. So yeah. He's the anti-woke governor, and he's suspended all teaching of African American history, and he's running for president. And he's about to have a party. And his whole thing is this is the no apologies. We're hard right and no apologies. And he's about to have a fundraiser at the Perry House. The Perry House was a plantation, or as they say now these days, a forced labor camp back in the antebellum years. And the Perry House, in particular, one of the structures on the Perry House saw horrific things. And I'm not going to tell you what they were. But you remember the horrible stuff from The Last Thing You Surrender? Worse. Worse. That's all I'll say. The house saw terrible things, and the house is haunted by the spirit of those things. And here comes Governor Buck Madigan to town for this party. It's called a Confederate Ball, and everybody will be dressed in antebellum dress and in Confederate wear. And they're going to have a fundraiser on the grounds of this party, of this house. And the house isn't happy about it. Okay, so it's about it's about accountability in that sense, about this whole idea of forgetting our passages, forgetting African American history. So it's about the house basically says if you bring this party here, because again the house is haunted and it's done thing. The house, I should mention, the whole property has been converted to a luxury hotel. So the quarters of the enslaved people have been converted to luxury hotels. Big puffy pillows and mints on the pillows and all that good stuff. In places where enslaved people once suffered. And the house is basically told the one person who can hear the house, if you bring these people here, I'm going to kill them. Say what? So it was kind of difficult. It was interesting to write because usually when you write a haunted house story, you're rooting for the people. But in this book, you're rooting for the house. So I'll be, I've just finished. I'm doing a final edit on that one, and I'm going to ship it off and see what the publisher says. But yeah, that's my next book, and it's called The Angry House. So, yeah, sure. Thank you. Are we done? Are we questioned out?
Unless you want to talk about Thelma.
Some more about. What do you want to know about Thelma?
Well, I want to know what.
I'm not going to tell you any secrets about Thelma now.
She was afraid.
She was afraid, yeah.
She was afraid to go back.
Right. Not even so. She hates Alabama. Alabama is where she's from. It's where she was born and where she lived the first 20 some years of her life. Okay. I got a fly who's a critic.
Right.
It's where she was born and where she grew up, and she hates Alabama. So it's not even so much fear. It's the fact that, all of her life's traumas and tortures descend from Alabama.
But she's Luther's mother, right?
She's Luther's sister.
Sister. Okay.
She's Adam's mom. Yeah,
I
Adam.
have the book.
Yeah, Adam is Luther is her brother. He's the one they saw the lynching together.
Okay.
But he was 9, she was not quite 3, so she doesn't recall it, and Luther can't forget it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, you're welcome. If that's it, then I think I will be signing books now. Thank you. I appreciate you.